The C is not for celebrity in CIO. So I kind of threw the thunder off. But the reality of it is, and I'll do a quick introduction. So I'm Ofori-Boateng, and you see the title up there. But more importantly, what I spend all my time doing is literally traveling around the globe, not North America, just around the globe. I literally came in here from Australia, and I'm going to Europe after this session. The reality is, as I go through all of the various banking and financial markets clients, you see the exact same thing. What you see is this pressure coming from the technology office that says, this is not about take costs out of the operation. This is not about, I want more efficiency in how I'm able to deliver. This is really the technology organization being reached out to and say, I'm looking for game-changing income streams. I'm looking for monetization of that cool stuff we invested in. Kevin, you're talking about this notion of knowing me, etc. Well, we're seeing three things. Know me, absolutely, we're seeing know me. That's the first one. Because obviously we know that the customer is empowered, everything is customer driven, etc. So you've got to know the customer, right? The second one is empower me, because the second part of that equation is, here's the scenario: I walk into a store, you know me, great. On the other side of that transaction is an associate who's got to do something about knowing me. It's the other side that says you've got to have that level of confidence, knowledge of what is in the organization, knowledge of the products, knowledge of technology to be able to say, how do you quickly service that client? And then the third piece is this whole notion of wow. Wow is when a client says, I'm expecting wow from Google. I'm expecting wow from Amazon. I'm expecting wow from Netflix. So you handle my money. Where's the wow? They're seeing that. So those are the three notions that we constantly see. So as I talk about the celebrity CIO, that's the CIO who says, or who's expected to say, I see it monetize an income stream in wow. I see an income stream in even the empowerment of employees. I see an income stream certainly in the knowing customers. Now, I picked this slide, as a lot of these, the two things for the next 35 minutes, you'll see lots of pictures and lots of quotes. This, to me, so on the left-hand side, this is my days in London doing the raves, right? So this is, you hold your lighter up, and yeah. But that was then. Today, you walk in there, and it used to be cell phones, now it's iPads. I mean, it's really anything to capture the entire thing digitized immediately. What I see there, and what a lot of CIOs and a lot of our colleagues are seeing there, is an opportunity for location information, offers information, something. What do I just see here? Now, this is two curves of two companies, none of them financial services, but two companies who took that knowing the customer. The first one is Radio Shack. Radio Shack says, I know my customer, I know what they want. That curve's, well, it's heading that way. And I mean, Radio Shack, I'm not picking on them, but that is a notion of taking an old world notion of knowing the customer, and increasingly we're seeing that that's really sliding down. As opposed to the bottom curve, which is Tesco. Where Tesco, in my mind, I find them phenomenal because they have said, how do we break out of our box? How do we find new income streams in what we have is a captive audience? I was in a retailer, I was in Finland, where a retailer, S-Corp actually, what they had done is they run the largest grocery chain in Finland. And what they'd done is they had a loyalty program, and you shop there and all that usual loyalty program. Then they acquired a bank. Well, guess what? At a certain point in time, they put a monetary value on the thousands of points everybody had, and then said, you now have a bank account. So that new bank they started out with basically a base of everybody who ever shopped at the largest grocery chain in Finland. That's the sort of innovation that Tesco's getting into. That's the sort of innovation that gets that curve going upwards. But this quote I find fascinating. So this is Zuckerberg's thought 3 years ago on this. It's not about the Radio Shack, I got to go know them better. It's I've got to understand what they will tell us about themselves and how I can be there when they're telling it to us. Think Facebook 3 or 4 years ago. I've got 3,000 likes, I've got 5,000 followers, and so what? You went out there, but you didn't actually, we weren't enabled to listen to what they wanted to say. And worse yet, when we were there and they told us what they wanted, we were not able to do anything about it. So to me, 3 years ago, I used to say to the banking clients, I said, well, effectively, you're better off not having a Facebook presence than having people think that when I tell you that, or when I friend you, and then I tell you about this honeymoon I'm about to have, and you miss the fact that I got married, that's an even worse proposition than if I didn't know you at all. But this, to me, is important. And I put this quote, and a few other quotes I think are important. You may disagree, but because this really sums it up. If we think about how do we get ourselves in where customers are, how do we get from assuming we know them to sort of assuming we don't know them and just sort of saying, what are they going to tell us about themselves? How are we going to listen, and how are we going to enable that into some new income stream? Obviously, not everybody did it. I mean, this is clear. You've seen these pictures. Nothing wrong with any of these stores, quite frankly. The products were not inferior. Nothing was inferior, but the business model was a little bit lagging, obviously, behind where customers were going. We didn't know what the customers were telling us. They didn't know what the customers were telling us. That's another quote. Now, I love this one. You know, I was with a CIO in Turkey. This is it's public, Guarantee Bank CIO. And I asked him, we're talking about, why did you embark on effectively what was a really forward-thinking change in your operations center all the way through to your customer experience? Why did you embark on that in the 90s? And he said, well, actually, because in the 90s in Turkey, we're dealing with inflation, so I had to get my processing fast so that, I didn't sort of lose money on the arbitrage during the time. However, when I got started, I said, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I could actually do a 10-minute mortgage, because now that I've got the back end working fast, I could link it quickly to the front end. So then he started thinking forward. Today, he's got a competitive advantage in Turkey because he did that change before he had to. His competitors are now saying, well, the time is right, but of course, there's a 5-year lead time to get there. Those are the sorts of things that we're starting to see. Now, this gentleman, he'll tell you he's a celebrity CIO with a big C on and the C is for celebrity. But that's just because from the perspective of how forward-thinking he was, he really said, my job is not to run the systems. My job is to find new income streams. My job is to not just cut the costs, but raise the revenue, the top line. That's how he looked at it. Clearly, this is the model. Clearly, the model of moving from reactive transaction orientation to a more proactive relationship, interactive model is the way forward. It does present some challenges, though. If I think about, so I'm sitting here with IBM thinking, how do we build an enterprise service bus, and how do we build technology architecture, right? Typically, if you're building for transaction, it's all about efficiency. All about efficiency. From the perspective of going into this whole interaction model, obviously it's a completely different model with two issues. One is you've got to understand, it's got to be custom oriented. It's got to be building what we call the customer focused enterprise from the outside in. Building that interaction, building these relationships also means that, and you are pointing this out, it's about core and surround. The core business is what you do well, but the surround business is what's cool, because quite frankly, a lot of what we do in banking isn't. So the surround business is what's cool, and the surround business is the stuff our customers see. They're not interested in the workings of how a DDA gets, or a check gets cleared and ACH happens. That's not cool. What is cool is I heard internet finance companies are the new way. So wow is if my bank could hook me up with Prosper and make my crowdfunding happen. That starts to bring in the notion, of the relationships. It starts to bring the notion of the partnerships, and of course it brings in the notion of this sort of architecture and the sort of platform that is needed to make that happen. It's the sort of technology leaders who are thinking about how do we make that happen. I go to China and I see what Alipay is doing. That's scary. I had a client ask me one day, he said, what if Google started a bank? What would it be about? I said, well, it would probably be about 0% interest. That's what it'll be about, because that's not the income stream. And he thought I was crazy, but the reality is that is where it's going. When I build a core and surround business that says, I make enough from my surround that wows enough of my clients that I'm turning the business model on its head. And the arbitrage, the spread's not that great anyway. And if you actually look at how the Googles of the world and the Alibabas of the world are coming into our industry, that's where it gets scary. But they're a bit ahead of us because they designed it. Well, they changed before. They didn't have to change. They designed it in that new business model, and we're sort of having to play catch up if we ever go there. And then this gets scary because the barrier to entry to getting there is lower. You can partner with any of these guys to get you there. And we've seen it happen. This is another quote of mine, which I sort of like, about how you take it from here to the next level. And the next level looks like this. Just look at this evolution of, and this is completely out there. This is the evolution of, I remember as a kid, I grew up in the UK and we used to read the A to Z, and that's how you got from anywhere to anywhere. But that was right here. And then all of a sudden, we had cell phones that we stuck in cars, and that was the way forward. But now look at this. Now we're at the point where we have taken, or not we didn't do anything about it, but the network has said, 4 years ago, we said social media is the way forward. We said social media is going to be about Facebook banking, and that didn't happen for regulatory reasons. But what has happened is that you've got things like Waze. What Waze does, it starts to build a critical part of that surround. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how an organization has taken a surround and done something with it. So we all know Uber, right? Uber, fantastic. Catch a cab, catch whatever. That's not the scary part. The scary part is what Uber did last Christmas with Home Depot. When Uber started delivering Christmas trees with Home Depot, completely different business model. An example of an old world company, new world company. Emirates Airlines, great airline, everybody loves them. Emirates has a service that says if you're a you spend that much in your ticket business, first class tickets, you arrive at your destination, I think 135 countries, they will pick you up from your home, drop you off at the airport. To run that, they have a fleet of vehicles. They have an entire fleet of vehicles that they buy, service, or they lease, service, and own in order to provide that service. Uber shows up, United, jam it into their app, and now you can just tack it onto your ticket, and now the experience becomes end-to-end. Their core business is flying you from Detroit to LA. However, they actually have an end-to-end service made up of being able to bolt on their surround, bolt on Uber. That's where it starts to get scary. So when I go back to the notion of the Google bank with the zero spread, where's the money? Well, the money is the fact that, well, guess what? You've probably heard this analogy. I don't want a mortgage, I want to own a home. Fine. So if I get a 0% mortgage, however, that bank is able to bolt on enough surround to say, let me walk you through everything from the school district to furniture buying to insurance to now I actually just enabled you to own a home. It's the zip cars analogy. You talk to a lot of car companies and they're like, well, our model's broken. Yes, it is. Nobody needs to own a car anymore. You get to a point where Uber sits in there, and all of a sudden that whole model is broken. So I'm just sort of, this is not to say that, it was gloom and doom and banking is all gone. But the sort of technology leaders I think a lot of us are, and the sort of things we're thinking about, is less about the efficiency, driving efficiency out of, fine, we're still worried about cost to income ratio, but that's not all of it. What's also worrisome is how do we architect our systems so we can bolt on an Uber and create a new business model? And this is where it gets to this conversation. You started talking about cloud. And cloud is scary. And, 3 or 4 years ago, cloud was, I've heard everything from, it's an extension of, the stuff we did for the Genome Project, the distributed, ultimate distributed model, all the way to, it's a great way to take costs out of, own less MIPS and, deal with spikes, it's all that good stuff. That was the beginning of the conversation. But if you look at what the implication of cloud is in this new world core and surround, it's very, very different. Because if you look at this, if you look at this chart and this notion of cloud intensity versus business value, a lot of the conversations are around here. It's around cloud enabling the infrastructure, which obviously has some, it has merit. It's a good thing to do. We've got to do it. It gives you access to a lot of computing power if you're a smaller organization. It gives you access to dealing with your spikes if you're a larger organization. And it gives you some, from a cost perspective, no doubt about it. You also have, from a dev test environment, the ability to say, I don't have to keep all these environments out. They provision all of them when some of them are actually not necessarily giving me as much, revenue. But the notion is, while you're doing this, and by no means is this chronological or sequential. While you're doing this, there is a different concept. If I want to bolt on an Uber to my United, what do I have to do? I have to understand that while the infrastructure bit, let's take cost out of running our normal stuff. But how do I ensure that I know what, there's a part of my organization that is cloud enabled, but there's a part of my organization that's born on the cloud. There's a part of my organization that says I can pick with, of course, the security concerns, but I can actually build what's ultimately that API economy. That the API economy says two things. It says from a developer point of view, if I want to create the new business model that is core and some surround, I am able to put it together. Obviously, it's not that simple. You've got to have the security wrappers. You've got to have, there's all that. But how do I build an organization that allows me to do that? In order to do that, I have to obviously have this notion of component-based capabilities. How do I take my erstwhile monolithic thing, deconstruct it into what is truly core and what is surround, look at where I'm sourcing my surround from? Some of it I can build better than anybody else. Now, if I'm a forward-thinking technology person, after I've built it better than everybody else, I'm white labeling that thing and selling it. So that's my next income stream. But I want to also be able to architect, so when I've built this Illustrator, say, you have everybody doing personal financial management. Well, it should be done once. After I've built that Illustrator, I want to be able to unhook it from my core systems and white label and sell it out. On the other hand, when I'm looking for instance, I'll tell you another one. Social credit scoring. That's another big one. Social credit scoring, and you'll a year from now we'll be talking about it. That's when it says I'm in a saturated market. Everybody I can lend money to, I've lent money to. How do I get to that other economy that is really not traditional anymore? I was talking to a chap in Barclays who said it's the how did he say? He said it's the side gig problem. The side gig problem is the guy who earns $30,000 above board and has a photography company he's running on Facebook. How do I get in there and actually understand those two sides of the person? How do I understand that I can actually look at enough about how a person tweets and how a person exists on social media to actually take that and put some modeling around it and get that social scoring? That's the sort of thing. If I want to bolt that onto my traditional business, how do I bring that in? That becomes really interesting. One of the things you'll probably also hear about is the notion of psycholinguistics, where we're actually starting to see a lot of research and a lot of tangible output coming in from, if I look, and I've seen this, if I looked at all of you, just around the room, I just looked at how you tweet, when you tweet, what you tweet, you can actually start to put together a profile that says, if I compare the profile of people who tweet at 2 a.m. about gloom and doom to certain credit scores versus people who tweet 9 to 5 about, their new businesses and upbeat stuff, you can start to see where I'm going with this. The truth is, it does two things. We talked about Empower Me. It actually gives you the ability to walk to a customer and understand what kind of customer they are. Are they risk averse? Are they somebody who's interested in the traditional business, or are they somebody who's really interested in the internet finance? I'll give you a few basis points off your loan if 50% of it is underwritten by by social media, if you would, by an IFC. Those sorts of things are coming out of psycholinguistics. Now, if you want to bolt that onto your regular business, it is a conversation around the componentization. It's a conversation around the API economy and how you source it, how you charge for it, how you pay for it. It's a conversation around the cloud, just cloud applications in general. And obviously, underpinning all of that is the cloud infrastructure we're talking about. So while I cringe as I was talking about the celebrity CIO, what we're starting to see is that the CIO who is thinking more about what we're seeing. I mean, I'm not a CIO. I'm just telling you what I see. But what we see is the CIOs who are saying, guys, I'm looking at my ROE, it's miserable. Hell, the CIO who understands an ROE is good too. But I'm looking at my ROE and it's terrible. My head of retail, my business, my CMO is saying to me, yeah, the IT part, I'm busy thinking about a shadow IT business, so that's another problem. But what I need you as a technology leader to do is, I hear mobile's the way forward, I hear cloud's the way forward, I hear new business models fueled by technology are the way forward, so who should I go buy? Who should I go plug into the API economy? What is really scary to me about this part, back in the days of DOS 5, it was very esoteric. So you didn't have too many business people getting into it. And the whole thing was about technology people having to understand the business. What we're starting to see now with this stuff, which is fairly intuitive, is that a lot of business guys are saying, yeah, I understand it. I read about an API economy in, Economist magazines. It's pretty good. So why don't we have one of those? So it's one of these conversations where the business is so much into the IT that the IT sort of has to really be able to have those business conversations and say, yes, this is why we're going to buy a white label or whatever. Those are the sorts of conversations we're starting to have. Now, I'm going to end it with this. A couple of just summary points. I mean, maybe these are generalizations, but we spend a lot of time, and as I travel around, just looking at the traits and the trends and what I see with these with technology leaders. And the first thing is, 5 years ago, somebody could come in and say, I'm a visionary. And all I need is, I'm a visionary, I'm an execution guy, and we're doing great stuff. But at the end, but what we're starting to see is, well, everybody's a visionary. The point is, how do you monetize that vision? You talk about simplicity. How do you simplify this thing? I mean, these architectures are not inherently simple. If you take a monolithic application, break it out into components, break some of it into core and surround, and start to think about monetizing bits of surround and bringing in other bits from external organizations, extremely complex. But somehow in that simplicity, in that complexity, is a monetizable simplicity. And that simplicity could be as straightforward as our business model is going the way of linens and things. So exactly, let's laser focus on what the new business model is and go make it happen. The second piece, Kevin, you talked about this a lot, is the notion of innovation. And the shift from innovation being a bunch of guys who meet, twice a month or once every 2 months and have innovative ideas. And well, we innovated, from 4 to 6 p.m. on a Thursday sort of thing, to embedding innovation into the organization. Now, we've all heard the story with the 3M and Honda. And that's one form of embedding innovation. The other form of embedding innovations is hackathons and the jams and any way to actually tease out those ideas from the organization. And one of the cool things in my mind is, as opposed to having a suggestion box which nobody opens, there is a way of filtering down these ideas very quickly having ways to monetize them. The other thing we're starting to see is partnerships. Partnering for innovation. I mean, you talked about the VCs. That accelerates innovation, accelerates the execution of it. But even partnering, like saying, right, let's get some universities online, let's get some technology firms online, let's get some user groups online. Now, the user innovation is starting to be interesting because that's where, I've sat through some of these. Now, I'll give you an example. This was a bank in India. We spent, 4 days going through what millennials want and what millennials need and the products and the channels and omni-channel and all that. And so on the fourth day, somebody had a brilliant idea of bringing in 3 or 4 millennials and saying, so what do you think? Didn't go well at all. Because it's like, well, yeah, I understand these products and I'm sure my father would be interested in it, but I want a rewards program that gives me pizza on Friday. Literally, that's what I want. I want a rewards program that says when the concerts are coming with the unattainable tickets, I will pay extra of my father's money to go get those tickets. But those are the sorts of innovation. So that's innovation we sitting around the room couldn't dream up. But it's that sort of bringing in the user community. And we talk about social. You look at folks like some of the Canadian banks, some of the banks in Australia, they're going out there and really driving innovation through competition and driving innovation through really pushing the envelope. The question becomes, once it comes back in, how do you enable it? Once you've gone out there and gotten everybody excited about this brilliant idea of some out there product that brings in the ecosystem and API economy, how do you enable it internally? How does it pass the risk guys? How does it because after all, it's a bank, right? How does it pass the risk guys? Yes, we think Amazon does it, so we should do it too, but it's a very different profile. But those are the sorts of things that we're seeing when it comes to embedding the culture of innovation. The second one is, I think it'd be too forward to use the word humility, but there is a certain measure of, there's confidence to go make it happen. But what we're starting to see is a certain measure of humility that says, it's not just me. The celebrity CIO or technology leader is not one guy. It is actually having embedded the innovation and having embedded all this, being able to step back and sort of seeing it permeate through the organization. However, focusing on failing fast. So the humility to be able to say, you know what, this didn't work. It failed. This is not the feather off my cap. It failed. Let's move on. This brings the notion of agile. So the whole notion of agile is really probably more so about how do I quickly, so I heard Waze is a new cool thing. We can monetize something. Somebody had an idea. We've got 6 weeks. Let's churn through it. Not a proof of concept. Let's go pilot. Let's go pilot, get a few people, pilot works, expand pilot, deploy. Or scrap it, move on, next idea. That sort of notion, very different. Also getting the business to understand that it's okay that we failed that fast, we failed that often, is a good thing. I've sat through where you bring the business into the evaluation committees of what's going on. They're like, well, guys, this is not working. And then the other one is moving that innovation across the organization. So it's great that social scoring worked for a little pilot group of millennials, but now taking the step back and saying, do we actually debunk our regular business and actually move this whole new idea across? Can we be that bold? That becomes difficult. The final one is this M&A thing. I'm sure a lot of you will attest to the fact that obviously these M&A things happen fast, and we can no longer afford to say, well, the business bought the company, now it's my job to integrate it. As opposed to, actually, I found a new income stream out there, and I was the one who led the purchase of it, and I was the one who led the business model, basically. I was the one who said Uber adding to United is going to form a new income stream that is going to give us the same capability as an Emirates for a fraction of the price. And that's really what we're seeing. And the final thing, another Mark Zuckerberg one, is absolutely that. Because if we're not moving so fast to question the business models, question the way we do business, question whether or not we use the new things coming online, it's a Linens and things. Or what's the other one? Blockbuster. That's the other one. So that's not so much celebrity CIO as in rock star, but the reality of it is, how do you drive business growth through this kind of innovation and through taking advantage of what is coming online? Because I'm seeing this more and more. You have banks like BNP Paribas in France. They formed Hello Bank. They just basically formed a whole new bank. The whole concept of the bank, it was not a whole new bank from a technology perspective, but the concept of the bank was, how do we have a place to incubate these ideas and grow them into something live? The other thing we're starting to see is what we call accelerated visioning. So accelerated visioning, which is the notion of how do we take a group of consumers and walk them through the development of product, channel, the whole ecosystem that they would want to use. Now, the third bit and unfortunately, none of these things have all come together, but the third bit of what you're talking about is this notion of, especially as banks are saying, we have to close down our stores, we have to take money out of our physical distribution, how do we use the space we have? What we're starting to see is a lot of banks and a lot of financial institutions saying, we're going to hold education sessions. So education is a two-way education. I'm teaching you how to use the products. I'm listening to your ideas. I'm taking your ideas as in the younger generation, doing gamification stuff. I'm feeding that back to you, see how you respond to it. So we're seeing a lot of that, but it's not quite coming together in the way you put it, but the pockets are starting to form. For instance, if I look at an equity bank in Kenya, or I look at some of the Grameen spawned organizations, they have a very different financial inclusion mandate that says that we are actually going to go over and above. Well, they have their own risk profiles, but we're going to go over and above the traditional risk model to provide for a greater good, which is a little bit of a different model from the purely commercial model. On the commercial models, what we start to see is, right, I see a halfway risky transaction. I'm only prepared to go in as a traditional bank 25%. But I can let you leverage my platform to actually give you access to everything out there for the other 75%. So those are some of the models that we are starting to see. But certainly from a financial inclusion perspective, it's good that those have been formed because they actually are able to have a very different risk tolerance level and provide those other products. I'll be the last person to tell you to take your core banking system and start to mess with it, actually, let alone start to componentize it too much and put it on somebody's cloud. So that's a very different conversation. So there's some core, you almost do evolutionary things to your core. So you really start to say, how do I chip away at my core? How do I bring cost per transaction down in a step-by-step process, a lot more measured? As opposed to the other side of the spectrum, which says, okay, core is there. Let's look at surround. Let's take advantage of what's happening in surround, and that would be a prime candidate for revolutionary change. That's how we see it.